One thing that's true for all moms, we have a lot of stories to tell. Some are silly, some are gross, some bring us to tears. With each story that's shared, another mom feels a little less alone. So join us as we laugh, learn, and grow together. It's the iMom Podcast. Welcome to this week's episode of the iMom Podcast. We're so glad you're here. So glad Chloe is here with this big baby growing in her belly. I mean, he is a big baby, right?
He is, yeah.
I'm really looking forward, Chloe, and Susan and Megan are here also. I'm looking forward, Chloe, to seeing how your marriage grows and changes with the addition of a baby. That's what we're talking about this week. Well, not quite that, but it's when kids make marriage difficult. Hopefully that's not the experience that you have. But Susan is sharing this week's story.
All right. So I think for us, one of the biggest ways that our kids cause conflict in our marriage was when they triangulate. In other words, they kind of do these, they find these little ways to pit you against one another. And one of our girls was really good at this, especially because my girls my husband was a little bit more enamored of our girls. He grew up in an all-boy household.
Well, he should have been.
Right, exactly. There you go. And so he just thought the girls were these sweet little, and I kind of saw some of their deceptive moves a little better. And one of our girls, he loved it when they would want to be with him. So if he had to run to the grocery store, of course, he would say, anyone want to go with me? And one of our girls would always say, yes. And then she would offer to push the cart. She would offer to load the things on the conveyor belt. And invariably, I would be there at the end of it, unloading all this stuff that I would not ever have put on our grocery list. And I would bring that up to my husband. He'd go, what are you talking about? No. And I'd say, look, she does this to you every time. Are you not watching? Or what? It's nothing. It's nothing. And we would get in a fight about it because it would be lots of stuff. And it didn't matter how many times I told him when he took her to the store, can you please not come home with all that junk that then, I have to get rid of? So that was just one little example of the way she would do this. But I think when a spouse puts a child above their spouse, doesn't take seriously the problem, and the child knows that, the child will then try to get away with whatever it is with that parent to tick off the other parent. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's, I think,
it's called triangulation.
Right. It's getting in the middle of an argument or doing something that makes this relationship now in the shape of a triangle. Yeah. Now you are part of the dynamic.
Or for example, your friends, you're a teenager, your friends invite you to go somewhere that your mother is not going to let you go to because she's got more information about it. So instead they go to the dad and he says yes.
Yeah. I think those are definitely things that come along. There's never a time in marriage where dealing with children does not require better communication and better relationship, practices and relationships. I think that what happens when they're teens or bigger kids is pretty different from what happens with little kids. Chloe, are you anticipating anything changing? I mean, obviously things are going to change, but
no.
Nope, things are exactly the same, just a new human. Things changing in your marriage? Are you feeling good about it?
Yeah, it's so funny because I just was talking to a friend of mine this week. She had come over just to kind of talk with me about, she's a doula and I'm not having a doula, but she was just helping me a lot with things to expect. And she had asked me a bunch of questions about, have you and Trent talked about who's going to get up, who's going to do this, this, and this. And I was already feeling oh gosh, I have this maternity leave and he doesn't have, as much time off. But I also don't want him to not be involved. And I'm kind of I have a lot of questions and a lot of things up in the air, but it's hard. There's a lot of decisions to make.
I want to say, didn't you mention something kind of when we were talking one day about you guys both really loving quality time and how you fear not being able to necessarily give each other as much?
Yeah. That's definitely a future fear, I'd say.
I think that's one of the things, especially when you have a little, a newborn or a toddler, where that child needs you to eat, to help him sleep, to go to the bathroom, all these things. All of a sudden you don't have as much free time to give your spouse when this child needs you.
And your brain's always on the child for
Yeah. Megan, I know that in conversations we've had, you've mentioned how, a lot of your friends are having kids who are between ages, 0 and 5 right now. And you guys are in that thick of it, of kids really starting to impact marriage. How do you think, what are some of the conversations that your friends are having? And what are some of the situations that your friends are in? Feel free to name them all.
No, I won't do that. I think it's just, one, they are little and they are very dependent, and so they can't do a lot for themselves. And so they take a lot of hand holding and just help. And I think, a lot of people where I live are dual income, and so they're both working, and it's a lot of energy going into work and a lot of energy at home. And then also too, just time. I mean, they take a lot of coaching, a lot of just preparation, they want you to play with them. They want you to lay in bed every night for 30 minutes as you tuck them in. I mean, it's just they require a lot of physical work and mental, I think too, because they're learning to form thoughts and behave and go to school and tie their shoes and whatever it might be.
I feel like other times that we've talked, you've specifically said, my friends are going through this in their marriage because it's just too hard with kids. Do you remember any of those?
So, I mean, one thing I could talk about is, I think there's some studies that say year 7 and I don't know what the other years, I'd have to look it up, but are the toughest in your marriage because at that point in your marriage, you tend to have little kids.
I have a friend. Her and her husband have not gone on dates. They never do anything without their kids. And it just affects them.
I think with babies, with little ones, it can be physical. You're just exhausted. You don't have time for each other. And I think as they get older, it can be a little bit more of a mental struggle. You have differences in, how you agree on parenting them or consequences or what they should or shouldn't be allowed to do. Or
I feel like that's even now though, because even now we have those disagreements. And not only that, but mentally it's tough because it requires a lot of patience and and just it's you're crying commotion all the time. One of them's crying, so
right. Yeah, I was talking to a friend the other day who was saying that she, when the kids were young, she didn't want to leave them. She always wanted to have them around, didn't want to leave them with a sitter or whatever. And now that they're older and the kids are like, yeah, mom and dad, go. We want to be alone. Mom and dad do not have that close connection because they didn't really spend the time together for all those years.
Yeah.
When the kids were little.
How do you do the hard thing and, make sure you're getting that time together even when it is difficult to leave your kids?
That's a great question.
And we'll see. And I feel like maybe I don't know if I'm the outlier or the norm, but I love leaving my kids with a babysitter.
Make that the episode quote.
I have truly never, ever had a problem with that. I think we've taken a vacation both times when our boys were 5 or 6 months
I know.
old.
I love that, Megan. I love that you guys do that.
Yeah. Well, Megan, what do you think has there been anything that's been hard to adjust to, how to stay close to your husband throughout these first, 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, for sure. We were in a little bit of a different situation too, because we actually never lived together until a year after we were married, because he deployed right after we got married. So we had a little bit of a adjustment there, and then we moved and then had kids. So,
how long did you guys live together before you had kids?
2 years.
Okay.
That's interesting.
You were married 2 years.
We were married 3 years, but he was gone for the whole first year.
Yeah.
So do you?
And you guys never lived in the same city before you were married, too.
No,
so,
the same state.
Are you sure you're married to the right guy? Are you confident this is the one?
Oh, trust me, we had a big adjustment when we actually ended up living together.
No kidding.
For us, the biggest rub is that we're both working, and it's really I feel like me doing all the kids stuff, prepping their school, prepping their doctor appointments, doing everything, but I'm also working full time.
No, I think the invisible load of motherhood, which we've talked about so many times, is
I know. That's
a strain on marriage, because moms really feel like it's theirs to do all the things, run the house, go to work, or if they work from home or are stay-at-home moms, to be the best at that, to earn that position, you know? And so then that puts a strain on the marriage because they're doing so much.
I told him, I was like, I feel like I'm just here. Like, I feel like no one sees me, and that like, you don't see me as like your like wife or someone that you're dating anymore. Like, I'm just here to work and serve and like deal with everyone versus like, and granted, obviously my boys are little, like that's not their responsibility or anything like that. But I told him, I was like, you know, I feel like I need you to see me, that like I'm here and like I still want to do things with us together and like have conversations together, and not just like once we put the kids to bed, go do whatever it is we need to get done or whatever it might be, watch a show.
Is the answer to that like you need quality time? You need like affirmation? What?
I think my point to him was like all the above. Like, I just don't feel like my love language is quality time, but I don't feel like I'm getting like quality love language in any bucket or anything. And I think that's just a struggle of like the day to day is you do have a schedule and a routine, and you just kind of fall into that when you're married and you have little kids, and they need that structure because they're little. But at the same time, I think it's exhausting to have little kids. And so by the end of the night, after you put them to bed, you're just like, I just want to zone out and do nothing because I cannot think or move another minute.
I think that as a mom of a baby or toddler especially, but even older, a little bit older, you give every love language every day, physical touch every day, words of affirmation every day, gift giving even. You know, you find a way to like, oh, look at this toy I found, and I found it under your bed, and here you go. What are the other ones? Acts of service. That's all you do as a mom. And then the fifth one. What's the fifth one?
Quality time.
Quality time. Yeah. I mean, you're really giving every single love language every day. So by the end of the day, you've given and given and given. And so, Megan, in response to like what you said to Hampton, well, yeah, you feel like you're just here because you're never going to get back what you've given as a mom. There's no way that they can fill up the space that you have poured out, you know, that what has been created by what you've poured out.
Yeah.
And I think that's just kind of part of motherhood. But the point of like this conversation today in this episode is like, okay, but how do you keep that from putting a wedge in your relationship with your husband? Like, what do you do if it's quality time that you need? How do you make sure you still get that quality time?
Motherhood is such a service, and it's a decision, and it's a, you know, really courageous thing that we do, but it's not like this martyr role. And how do you get out of that mindset of like, well, that's just what I do. I just give, I give, I give. Because at some point you have to advocate for yourself. But I imagine, I mean, I'm not there yet, but I imagine it's hard to advocate for yourself when you're used to just giving.
Yeah. Or when you're the one who provides the food.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Well, your husband would be like, I can't do what you do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for us in particular, it was just, okay, we have to make time to do things just the two of us, because we also got in a really bad habit of all of our quote unquote date nights being like with 4 other couples.
Yeah,
and then it would just be like the girls talking and the guys talking, and we didn't actually spend time together. We were just in a big group of people, but we were using like all of our date nights and sitters and things like that to go do group things. And so we had to take a step back and say like, okay, we have to do things just the two of us. And I actually got in trouble because of course we had a date scheduled and I invited like 2 other couples. I got one person.
Did you like sit by him, or did you sit girls at one end, guys at the other end?
No, I mean, it's just, we had to really realize, okay, if we're too tired to do it during the weekdays and sit down and have a conversation or whatever it might be, then we have to make that time on the weekends for just the two of us to connect and chat and do whatever.
So I made a list of ways that I think that I've seen couples, you know, face challenges with children. Which ones do you think, based on like what you've heard from your friends or other couples, which ones do you think are the most relevant and what you've seen the most of? Not having as much free time or time to just kind of check in with one another and be present with one another. Disagreeing on a rule or discipline. Lack of energy or privacy to have sex. A child manipulating one parent. or one spouse feeling like the kids get all the attention and energy? Which of those do you think produces the most tension or conflict from what you've seen or what you've experienced?
I think, but my kids, I'm closer to the parents who have older kids, is more, there were two of them that kind of fit in that category.
Disagreeing
where,
on the rule?
Not agreeing about the children. You know, if you have teenagers, there's just lots of things you cannot agree about.
I think for me, it is the lack of energy to give my husband anything. I'm like, and I'm sounds bad to say, but I'm a part-time mom. My kids are with their dad 50% of the time. But when they're with me, so much of my energy goes to them, my mental energy, my physical affection. And he kind of gets the dregs, like whatever is left, he gets. And I know that is not what should happen. I don't think that's true when it comes to like respect, and I don't think I put them before him, but I do think that my energy really gets poured into them.
Yeah, that's how my friends are too. A lot of my friends have babies and toddlers, and a lot of them talk about just feeling like their bodies aren't their bodies. They belong to their kids because, you know, they're feeding or something along those lines. So it's like when it comes time to, you know, to have sex, it's like, I don't even feel like this is my body.
No, there's been things on me or spit up on me.
Right, yeah.
Just not feeling it.
Yeah.
I get that. I totally get that. What do you think, or how do you think the idea of dating your spouse changes over the seasons of parenting? So like if you have a small child versus having teenagers, do you think that it becomes easier or harder or more of a priority in those seasons?
I don't know because I haven't been through all the seasons, but I feel like we've just tried to make it a priority right now to do something just the two of us. But when we were out together, just the two of us the other day, we were kind of sitting there and we were like, well, what do we talk about now? And I was like, see, this is why we have to do this, because when our kids leave, we can't be sitting there like not knowing what to do with each other. And this is why we have to do this more often, so that we know how to be together, just the two of us, when our kids do leave.
And good for you for noticing that now, Megan. That's great.
Yeah. Susan, kind of shifting to like older kids, if you do notice that you have a child who favors your husband, or maybe if your child favors you, so they favor one parent over the other and is trying to manipulate or to use one of you, I mean, what do you do? Do you just come right out and tell the other parent, hey, I see this happening, but do you not see it happening? They want to deny it maybe because they like the attention. They like being the favored parent. Like, how do you have that conversation?
Yeah, we did have to have that conversation. And you know, to his credit, Mark was really good about it. At first he didn't kind of believe it, but then I just kept having to bring him examples, and he did. And so then I'd have to kind of coach him. Okay, you're going with this child this time, and this is what they tend to do, or this is what, if I left them alone, like if I went away for a weekend, I'd go, okay, here's how this is going to go down.
I specifically remember my dad coming to me and going, well, what did mom say? And I was like, oh, shoot. Figured it out.
Busted.
Yeah.
Mark does not read between the lines, movie or children. Like even in movies, he doesn't read between the lines. Like often he just doesn't see what's coming. And so I would really have to like prep him. All right, you're going to go with this child to this. This is how it's going to go down. Just be aware of it. If you have any questions, call me.
When it comes to like one parent being close to the child, and I feel like I've seen it a lot with like mothers and daughters, you know, like the mother and daughter form this tight bond, and then the daughter doesn't think that dad understands, or, you know, like dad just, you know, won't let me wear this. And then mom tries to like sympathize, and mom enjoys the closeness that she experiences with the daughter because of that. I think that is something that I've seen in a lot of parents. Kind of speaking of that and triangulation that you mentioned earlier, Susan, I read this really interesting exercise. So you draw a triangle and you label the points, mom, dad, and then the child's name. And the size and shape of the triangle and like the names are determined by who is emotionally the closest. So if you imagine like this acute triangle with really long sides where mom and dad are at the base, which are the closest, and then the child is at the point, which is farthest away, that's good because then mom and dad are the closest. But if that's not the way that those names end up, if it's mom and daughter as those closest points, and then dad is far away, then that's problematic. So in a good family dynamic, you always want this triangle to be where mom and dad are the closest points and the child is the one that's farther away. You're all still connected, but you're most closely connected to your spouse. I thought that would be, if you're not sure if this applies to you, kind of run through that mental exercise. And if it's an obtuse triangle, I don't even know. Yeah. I don't do geometry. That's the extent of my geometry. Have you guys heard of the rule of one when it comes to trying to really invest time with your husband or wife, your spouse?
No.
Well, there's different versions of this, but one of them is the rule of one, and it's that you try to do one night in per week, one night out per month, and one weekend away per year. So one night in per week, and that can look like putting the kids to bed, at a half hour early, and then you guys getting some time to sit on the couch together and talk, with the TV off. One night out per month, that is usually somewhat affordable as far as babysitters go, once a month, and then one weekend away per year. And our writer that wrote about this, she said, we take a weekend in a town where there's somebody who can watch our kids. So like a relative or a friend that we haven't seen well, that wouldn't work. I don't think she said that. You don't want to be like, hey friend, haven't seen you in a while. Here's my kids. But kind of piggybacking, like drop the kids off and spend the weekend exploring this town that they don't live in. But I thought that felt like a doable, nothing too crazy, but just a way to really continue to invest and be intentional in your marriage.
I'll let you guys know how I do with this in about 9 months. Yeah.
I'm really curious. I'm really excited to see how, I think you guys, I don't know, I think kids can make a good marriage stronger, if you do the right things.
I certainly have I have a friend they have a 6-month-old, and it really has made their marriage even stronger.
I wonder if having kids can bring out the nature of just kind of the relationship and
yeah. Oh, I totally think having kids makes a marriage stronger. Hey, you learn to work as a team. You're not two adults. You're like, you got to team up together. And the more kids you have, the more you have to team up. So I definitely think it makes, plus it's just it's that next step of being self-sacrificing. Like getting married is a sacrifice. You got to learn to compromise, live together, whatever. But then having kids, it takes it to a new level.
I'm going to put the 30-day marriage challenge in our show notes. That's a great way. If you do need to reconnect with your husband, that's a great way to do it. And, give it to him too. Maybe you guys can both do it together. And we have a lot of really good printables actually to help strengthen your marriage, including praying for your marriage. So I'll put that in there too. And thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the iMom podcast. iMom is the motherhood program of the nonprofit organization Family First. Along with our fatherhood program, All Pro Dad, we exist to help you love your family well. Subscribe to our daily email, the iMom Minute, by going to imom.com/subscribe and get tons of great ideas, insight, and inspiration. The iMom podcast is hosted by me, Abby Watts, along with Susan Merrill, Megan Tigner, and Chloe Blumenthal.